The city exhaled, not the crisp, sharp breath of a country dawn, but a thick, viscous sigh of coal smoke and river mist coiling in upon itself. Distant foghorns moaned a mournful symphony across the unseen Thames, their deep calls muffled, swallowed by the encroaching gloom. The faint, rhythmic scrape of a street sweeper's broom was barely audible, lost almost immediately in the pervasive dampness. Here, on the slick, wet cobblestones of London, dusk was not merely the fading of light, but a relentless, insidious descent into something far more ancient, more elemental than mere darkness. It was a surrender, a pea-souper. It rolled in with a quiet, predatory purpose, stealing the city's dimensions, one lamppost, one street corner, one familiar face at a time. Gaslights, struggling valiantly against the encroaching opacity, became not sources of illumination, but hazy halos, spectral eyes peering out from an indeterminate void. Each breath was a taste of the city's grim reality, a metallic tang, the acrid bite of burning coal on the tongue, mingling with the indefinable scent of damp brick, unseen refuse, and unwashed humanity. It was a fog that didn't just obscure sight, but pressed against the very skin, a chill that seeped through threadbare wool and torn lining, settling deep into the bones. The biting cold was a constant, insidious companion, whispering of frostbite and fever, a promise of deeper suffering. Every weary step echoed with a dull, wet slap on the cobblestones. A woman, her frame stooped less by age and more by the relentless press of a life lived on the fringes, moved through this encroaching gray. Her worn boots, once stout, now offered little defense against the pervasive damp, the cold seeping up from the very ground, a frigid current that climbed her legs. Clutched tightly in her larger, calloused hand was a smaller one, soft and still surprisingly warm, belonging to the child who trotted beside her, their slight form almost swallowed by the billowing fog. The child's cough, a dry, reedy sound, was quickly smothered by the dense air, just another fleeting whisper in the vast, indifferent symphony of the city's struggle. Hunger, a familiar, gnawing companion, tightened its grip in the woman's stomach. It was a dull ache that had become as constant as the beating of her own tired heart, a sensation her body had learned to translate into a relentless, internal ticking clock. With every passing moment, as the brief, gray day bled irrevocably into the oppressive night, that clock gained a louder, more frantic beat. Nightfall in London was not a time for rest, but for survival, for the grim arithmetic of a few remaining pennies, weighed against the chilling certainty. No bed, no shelter, meant the street. It meant exposure to a cold that could kill, to dangers that lurked in every unlit recess, to an even deeper shame than hunger or cold, the shame of utter helplessness. Her own breath plumed white, visible for a fleeting moment before dissolving into the greater, all-consuming fog. Each exhalation was a quiet testament to her desperation, a silent prayer for strength to endure, to protect the fragile life beside her. Her gaze, weary but sharp, darted through the murk, searching for something, anything, a recognizable landmark in this shapeless world, a distant, brighter glow that promised warmth, a sign of hope, however small. The distant, muted rumble of industry, the ceaseless churn of the city's unseen machinery, was a constant, almost hypnotic backdrop to her silent dread. It spoke of immense wealth and relentless progress, a stark, cruel contrast to her own precarious existence, where every sunrise brought the same question of basic survival. She glanced down, her eyes finding her child's face, partially obscured by the woolen hood she had pulled tight. In the child's wide, innocent eyes, she saw not just fatigue, but a nascent fear, a mirroring of her own unspoken terror. It was a fear that understood, without words, the stakes of the coming hours, a fear of the deepening cold, of the looming darkness, of the monstrous uncertainty that night brought to those without walls or warmth. It was a fear she fought to absorb, to hide, to somehow diminish with the reassuring pressure of her hand, a silent promise to protect, no matter the cost. But the fog, like a living entity, seemed to press this fear even closer, whispering its dark possibilities with every gust of damp air. With each weary step, the known streets gave way to a labyrinth of narrow, unlit alleys, a place where the pervasive pea-souper seemed to concentrate every foulness, making the air thick not just with moisture, but with the cloying stench of human neglect. Here, the aroma of coal smoke that clung to everything mingled with the sharper, more visceral odors of sewage, stale beer, and unwashed bodies, a suffocating perfume of poverty and despair. Tenement houses, their brickwork blackened and crumbling, leaned precariously into the gloom, their upper floors all but swallowed by the murk. Windows, dark and vacant, stared like blind eyes, or occasionally emitted a faint, sickly yellow light, a testament to a flickering gas jet or a solitary candle. From within these decaying structures, a symphony of urban misery drifted out, the muffled arguments of unseen families, the chilling scuttling of rats across cobblestones, a baby's thin, desperate cry that seemed to pierce the very fog itself, and the distant, eerie laughter of drunks, a sound devoid of joy, echoing with a hollow menace. Each sound was a brushstroke in a painting of suffering, a reminder of the raw, unvarnished existence that thrived in London's forgotten corners. The constant threat of disease hung heavy in the damp air, emanating from the overflowing gutters that channeled filth and waste directly into the pathways, turning the ground underfoot into a treacherous, germ-laden slick. To breathe here was to inhale sickness. To walk here was to court contagion. Her vigilance, already stretched thin by exhaustion, sharpened into an instinct. She instinctively pulled her child closer, her body becoming a shield against the most jarring sights and sounds. She tried to guide her child's gaze away from the worst of it, from the shadowed figures huddled in doorways, from the open sores of a homeless man begging with a wheezing cough. from the sheer, overwhelming evidence of human brokenness. Yet glimpses were unavoidable. Other desperate figures moved through the gloom, spectral and silent. A stooped street sweeper, his broom a rhythmic whisper against the paving stones. A mudlark, his eyes scanning the river's edge for anything of value. A pure finder, sifting through the filth for dog excrement to sell to tanners. There was a silent exchange of glances between them, a flicker of understanding that transcended words, a shared plight, a recognition of the invisible bonds of poverty that tied them all to this grim struggle for survival. The child, sensing the deepening despair, let out a soft whimper, a small, fragile sound quickly soothed by the mother's murmur and the reassuring pressure of her hand. Her fingers brushed against the rough brick walls of a passing building, cold and damp, a tactile reminder of the city's unyielding hardness. The slippery grime underfoot made every step a careful calculation, a constant effort to maintain balance. But the fear of falling, the fear of injury, was secondary to the relentless, driving pursuit of warm, if temporary, haven. Every instinct screamed for shelter, for a brief respite from the biting cold, the pervasive stench, and the ceaseless threat that lurked in every shadow. Then, through a sudden thinning of the swirling grayness, a dim, grimy sign appeared. It hung precariously, swaying slightly in the unseen drafts, its faded lettering barely legible through the murk. Common lodging house. A beacon of sorts, beckoning them closer, but its very existence whispered of desperation. The door, heavy and ominous, loomed ahead, promising temporary respite, but also a deeper immersion into the heart of London's invisible suffering. The heavy door, begrimed and scarred by countless hands, yielded with a prolonged groan under the mother's tentative push. As it reluctantly swung inward, the sudden assault of noise and heat was like a physical blow after the muted, biting chill of the fog-bound street. Immediately, her eyes, wide and weary, sought out the figure of the deputy, the keeper of this temporary, crowded haven. He sat hunched behind a crude wooden counter, a man whose face was a landscape etched with suspicion and hardened indifference, his gaze sweeping over them, devoid of any hint of welcome or compassion. He saw only another pair of mouths to feed, another 2 bodies to accommodate for a paltry fee, a transaction he'd made hundreds, perhaps thousands of times. With a heart heavy with the sheer weight of its scarcity, the mother reached into the worn, shallow pocket of her dress. Her fingers, numb and stiff from the persistent cold, fumbled for the few precious copper pennies, almost all that remained of their meager existence. The metallic clink as they dropped onto the rough wooden counter felt impossibly loud in the tense hush, a stark declaration of their destitution, echoing momentarily before being swallowed by the room's constant hum. The deputy merely grunted, scooping them up with a calloused hand, his eyes already drifting past them to the dark, churning street beyond, already anticipating the next desperate soul. It was a transaction utterly stripped of humanity, reduced to the raw, transactional mechanics of survival. Then the true shock of the common room fully enveloped them. The air was not merely warm, it was thick, cloying, almost suffocating, laden with a powerful composite stench that seemed to coat the inside of her mouth. The overwhelming smell of unwashed humanity, of bodies pressed too close together for too long, mingled with the sharp, acrid tang of cheap tobacco smoke, the flat, earthy aroma of slowly boiling cabbage, and the sickly sweet decay of stale gin. It was a smell that clung to the throat, that seemed to permeate the very fibers of their threadbare clothing and hair, a constant physical reminder of their poverty. A roaring fire, fed by cheap coal and scraps of wood, blazed in a large, soot-stained hearth at one end of the room, casting flickering orange light that battled weakly against the pervasive gloom. This fire was the indisputable source of the stifling warmth, a stark, almost violent contrast to the penetrating cold outside. But it also baked the air, making every breath a conscious, heavy effort. The common room itself was a chaotic tableau of human misery, and, against all odds, a strange sort of resilience. Bodies were sprawled in various states of undress or exhaustion on bare, straw-filled mattresses laid directly on the floor, or slumped on hard wooden benches that lined the perpetually grimy walls. The cacophony was constant, a low, guttural symphony of the city's forgotten. There were deep, resonant snores that seemed to vibrate through the very floorboards, punctuated by sudden, sharp, hacking coughs that seemed to tear at the lungs of their unseen owners. Hushed, urgent conversations murmured in shadowed corners, punctuated by the occasional raised voice or a sudden, startled cry from a restless child. The incessant rustle of straw as someone shifted their aching position added yet another layer to the overwhelming, disorienting soundscape, leaving no space for quiet reflection. A short, brutal list of rigid rules, scrawled in charcoal on a grimy wooden board nailed near the door, was hastily pointed out by the deputy without meeting their gaze. No fighting, no stealing, out by morning. Simple, unforgiving commands that governed this temporary, communal purgatory. The mother, her knuckles white as she clutched her child's smaller hand even tighter, began to navigate the crowded, suffocating space. Her eyes, wide with a mixture of fear and a desperate, fragile hope, scanned every inch of the room, searching for the smallest, most insignificant corner. A place, any place, however cramped or dirty, where they could simply be for a few precious hours, a temporary refuge from the street, even if it offered little comfort or true safety. Just a sliver of space to survive the night, to keep her child warm, to try and mend their shattered spirits for another day. The bed secured, a thin mattress on the floor, barely enough space for two small bodies. But this shelter is not sanctuary. It is a crucible, a living, breathing testament to the city's forgotten, where every breath is shared and every privacy stripped away. The thin, straw-filled mattress was indeed little more than a whisper of separation from the grimy floorboards, a fleeting promise of rest. Here, In the common room of the lodging house, a universe of quiet desperation unfolded. It was a single vast chamber, hazy with the exhalations of dozens of bodies, the cloying scent of cheap tobacco smoke, and the lingering metallic tang of stale gin. A low, guttural symphony of snores and murmurs rose and fell, punctuated by the restless shifting of limbs and the dry, rasping coughs that seemed to echo from every dark corner. All around them, a tableau of broken lives and enduring spirits. Near the communal roaring fire, its fierce heat a stark, almost violent comfort against the city's omnipresent chill, an old man hunched. His face was a road map of hardship, deeply etched with the valleys of hunger and the mountains of countless sleepless nights. Each breath he took was a shallow, painful struggle, a hacking cough tearing through the fragile quiet of his sleep, telling a silent story of lungs choked by soot and damp. Further on, a massive form sprawled, a rough-looking dock worker, his calloused hands curled into fists, even in sleep, dreaming, perhaps, of the phantom weight of sacks and the elusive promise of a full meal. His worn wool coat, stiff with dried mud and river grime, offered little protection against the chill that still managed to seep in, even by the fire. In another dim corner, by the flickering gaslight, a young seamstress sat upright, her fingers still moving almost unconsciously, mending a threadbare apron. Her eyes, red-rimmed and swollen, spoke of hours bent over a needle, coaxing life from scraps of fabric, her entire existence reduced to the monotonous rhythm of stitch after stitch. She hummed a tuneless, mournful melody, a whisper of a lost home, a faded dream. Whispers drifted through the air, fragments of lost livelihoods, half-confessed petty crimes, the distant, impossible memory of a childhood house with a real roof. This constant, low hum was the background score of human misery, yes, but also of an extraordinary, unyielding resilience. The mother sat rigid, her child tucked close against her side, forming an invisible shield. Every creak of the floorboards, every sudden movement, every muttered word sharpened her senses. She was a sentinel, guarding the fragile flame of her child's innocence against the encroaching darkness of this world. Privacy here was a cruel joke, a concept long abandoned. Every breath was shared, every personal space violated by the sheer press of bodies, the overwhelming intimacy of shared poverty. To simply exist without being seen, without being judged, felt like an impossible luxury. A shared tin pot, blackened by countless fires, sat near the hearth, offering its meager warmth to anyone brave enough to approach. There was a grudging generosity in some eyes, a silent understanding of shared plight, but mostly a raw, protective suspicion. Each person was an island, battling for their own survival, wary of anyone who might diminish their already meager share of warmth or air. The rough texture of the thin blanket, damp with the room's heavy air, scratched against her cheek. She pulled it tighter around her child, trying to ward off the insidious chill that seemed to penetrate even this stifling heat. Her child stirred, small fingers finding hers. "Mama," a tiny voice mumbled, "why is it so loud?" "Hush, little one," she whispered, her voice a strained comfort. "Everyone is just resting. Soon we will too." She stroked her child's hair, damp with sweat from the close air. The internal monologue was a familiar litany. The crushing weight of responsibility, the desperate, almost foolish hope for a tomorrow that might somehow be different. Yet beneath it all, the cold certainty of tomorrow's renewed struggle pressed down, a heavy, unshakable burden. As the night deepens, the air grows heavier, not just with human breath, but with the unseen menace that truly haunted these crowded spaces. For in the very air they breathe, an invisible enemy lurks, far more insidious than hunger or cold. The air in the common room, thick and stagnant, was heavy with more than just the collective breath of its inhabitants. It was a breeding ground for an unseen enemy, an insidious threat far more menacing than the gnawing hunger or the biting cold of the streets. Here, in this close, unwashed space, the unseen horrors crawled and bred. Fleas, persistent and maddening, found their purchase on any exposed skin, leaving behind pinprick bites that itched relentlessly. Lice, unseen but profoundly felt, moved through matted hair and worn fabric, a constant, irritating reminder of the impossibility of true cleanliness. Dampness, an enduring companion of London's fog-laden air, clung to everything within these walls. It seeped into the very fibers of their threadbare clothes, into the straw of the mattresses, fostering a perpetual chill that settled deep in the bones, a cold that seemed to invite sickness. And sickness came. It swept through the common room like a relentless tide, a relentless wave of coughs and fevers that passed from one body to the next, a contagion often unspoken, but universally feared. The dry, hacking cough of the old man in the corner, the croupy gasp of a child nearby, the ragged wheezing of someone stirring in their sleep, each sound a chilling note in the night's symphony of suffering. The names of these invisible assassins were whispered in hushed tones, a terrifying litany that haunted every waking moment and invaded every troubled dream. Cholera, a swift and brutal killer. Smallpox, leaving its indelible marks or claiming life outright. Typhus, the fever that consumed. Consumption, slowly wasting away its victims. In this environment, where clean water was a rare luxury, where washing facilities were non-existent or shared by dozens, where hygiene was a concept utterly unattainable, these diseases were not distant threats. They were ever-present residents, lurking in every unwashed corner, in every shared breath. The mother, even in her exhaustion, maintained a meticulous, almost ritualistic vigilance over her child. Her hand would steal out again and again to feel the small forehead, searching for the telltale heat of a fever that could consume them both. She would listen intently for any subtle change in breathing, for the telltale rattle in the chest, for a persistent cough that might hint at something far more sinister than a mere chill. Each symptom, however small, was a potential harbinger of ruin. There was an utter helplessness in the face of such an invisible, relentless foe. She could fight hunger with a stolen crust, or cold with a scrap of blanket, but against the unseen spores and contagions, she was utterly defenseless. The cold dread gnawed at her, a constant, consuming companion, even as her heavy eyelids yearned desperately for sleep. What if she woke to find her child's breathing shallow, or their skin burning with an uncontrollable fever? The fear was a physical ache, sharper than hunger, colder than the damp air. From around her, the sounds of restless sleepers continued. Groans, shuffles, and then, inevitably, sudden violent coughs that tore through the stillness of the night. Each one a stark reminder of the oppressive knowledge that one illness, one serious fever, one relentless cough could mean the end of their struggle for survival. It could mean the dreaded workhouse, the separation of mother and child, or perhaps even worse, a pauper's grave in an unmarked plot. These were the true stakes of a penny for a bed. But even as the night holds its breath, waiting for dawn, there is a certain rhythm to this desperate existence. The promise of a new day, however false, pulls them forward. Soon the deputy's shout will cut through the oppressive air, forcing them back onto the streets, and the cycle will begin anew. The deputy's shout was a cruel, jarring bark that tore through the fragile, fitful peace of the common room. "Up! Up, the lot of ye! Dawn be breaking!" It was an ugly, guttural sound, devoid of sympathy, yet it held a certain inevitable power. Bodies stirred with a collective groan, a symphony of weary joints and sleep-starved souls. The air, already thick with the night's exhalations and stale odors, now rustled with the hurried movements of dozens of individuals. A man coughed, a deep, rattling sound that seemed to shake his very bones. Another swore softly, pulling on ragged trousers. The mother, already half awake, her senses alert even in slumber, flinched at the deputy's roar. Her child, nestled close, stirred and whimpered, clinging tighter. "Shh, little one," she whispered, her voice rough with fatigue. "Time to go." Their meager belongings, the worn shawl, the small, carefully folded bundle containing a single spare shift and a chipped wooden toy, were quickly gathered. It took only moments, a practiced ritual refined by countless nights of desperate flight. The coarse blanket, damp with the night's chill and the sweat of shared bodies, was folded, handed back to the deputy with a silent nod, or perhaps a silent curse. One by one they filed out, a silent exodus of shadows, merging with the gray pre-dawn. The door creaked open, revealing a world still suffocated by the omnipresent fog. It was a cold, sharp shock, the biting morning air a stark, brutal contrast to the stale, cloying warmth of the common room. It snatched the breath from her lungs, carrying with it the familiar tang of coal smoke, damp earth, and the faint, acrid scent of the river. Yet, even through the chill and the swirling murk, there was a faint, almost imperceptible glimmer, a promise of light far, far above the rooftops, hinting that the sun might one day break through. For a fleeting, dizzying moment, there was a perverse sense of release. The oppressive weight of so many bodies, so many shared breaths, lifted. The cramped confines of the lodging house, with its constant hum of suffering and its invisible threats, faded behind them. But this freedom was an illusion, a temporary respite from one prison, only to return to the larger, more unpredictable one of the streets. Their footsteps, once again, echoed softly on the wet cobblestones, joining the growing, muffled chorus of the awakening city. Distant church bells chimed, their sound muted by the fog, like a ghostly reminder of a world that continued regardless of their struggle. The first order of the day was always the same: sustenance. A street vendor, hunched over a brazier, his breath pluming white in the cold, offered stale bread and watery tea. The mother reached into her pocket, her fingers tracing the worn copper coins, a few precious pennies that represented their bridge to another day. "Just one, if you please," she murmured, her voice barely audible. The bread was hard, tasting faintly of soot and yesterdays. The tea, lukewarm and weak, offered little warmth, but a momentary comfort. Her child took a small, careful sip, their small hands cupping the tin mug, eyes wide as the steam curled upwards. For a moment, the world narrowed to this simple, primal act of consumption, a fleeting pause in the relentless grind. As they walked, the scent of coal smoke lingered on their clothes, a persistent memory of the night. The damp wool of her shawl clung to her shoulders, heavy and cold. But with each step, a quiet, steely resolve began to form anew within the mother. The fear of the previous night had been replaced by the grim determination of the morning. Another day of labor lay ahead, another day of searching for odd jobs, for discarded scraps, for anything that might earn enough to put food in their mouths, and, crucially, to secure the promise of a bed for the coming night. The sounds of horses' hooves clattered nearby, a cart rumbling past, its wheels spitting muddy water. The city was stirring, waking to its endless industry, indifferent to the personal battles fought within its gray, fog-choked streets. The sun rises, casting long, weak shadows through the fog. But for those like her, each sunrise brings the same relentless question. How will they earn enough, scavenge enough, survive enough to secure a bed once more and stave off the endless night of the streets? And so the relentless cycle of the lodging house churned on, a forgotten rhythm beating beneath the grand facade of Victorian progress. It was the daily reality for millions, a silent, grinding struggle for existence that shaped lives as profoundly as any factory or parliament. Throughout this journey, we have felt the pervasive, damp chill of the pea-souper fog, clinging to worn coats and seeping into the very bones. We have tasted the acrid bite of coal smoke, ever present, tainting the air and coating the tongue. We have seen the metallic tang of gaslight, haloed and diffused by the swirling mist, casting fleeting, deceptive shadows on wet cobblestones that gleamed like slick black glass. The constant, almost subterranean rumble of industry, the distant thrum of engines and the clang of hammers, served as an indifferent backdrop to countless personal tragedies. This was the silent suffering, the quiet desperation etched into the faces of men, women, and children who, like our nameless mother and child, moved through the city's labyrinthine streets. These were the true hidden costs of Victorian progress, not quantifiable in ledgers or debated in drawing rooms, but paid out in the priceless currency of dignity stripped away, in health irrevocably broken, and in the slow, agonizing erosion of hope itself. The system's vast indifference, its inability or unwillingness to address the sheer, overwhelming scale of urban poverty, created a chasm between the Gilded Age and the lives lived in its shadows. Yet, within this stark, unyielding landscape, there was also a testament to something profound, the incredible resilience of the human spirit, a quiet, stubborn refusal to yield, battling simply to exist from one cold, uncertain night to the next, clutching to the smallest ember of a future. The legacy of those who vanished into the fog, whose names were never recorded, whose stories were never told in history books, remains forever woven into the very fabric of this great, sprawling city. Their struggle, their breath, their unspoken prayers are still there, if one knows where to listen. And it is in these invisible lives, these untold stories, that we truly begin to understand what it meant to feel Victorian London, beyond the grand narratives of empire and the opulent facades of wealth. It is in the damp chill, the acrid smoke, the hunger, the fear, and the unyielding will to survive that we find its most profound, most human truth.